Throughout Eastern Europe, millions vowed to build the communist paradise. They toiled to carry out orders and plans dictated from Moscow. They marched behind the banners of Joseph Stalin. March 1953. The Soviet Union mourns the death of Stalin. For almost 3 decades, Stalin ruled supreme. How would they manage without him?
It felt as if the whole world was about to collapse. We wondered what was going to happen to us. We thought of Stalin as our father who would always look after us.
Stalin died without naming a successor. A collective leadership emerged, led by Georgy Malenkov, Lavrenti Beria, Vyacheslav Molotov, and Nikita Khrushchev. Millions of Russians grieved for their dead leader, even though his rule had been ruthless and their own welfare neglected. Stalin had transformed the Soviet Union into a superpower, but at his death, relations with America and the West had seldom been worse.
For 10 years, the world has been dominated by the malignant power of Stalin. A new era begins, an era in which the guiding spirit is liberty, not enslavement, and when human relations will be those of fraternity, not one-man domination.
America, too, had a new leadership. President Eisenhower, Secretary of State Dulles, and Vice President Nixon pledged that they would roll back the frontiers of Soviet power. Eisenhower and Dulles had accused the Truman administration of being soft on communism. Now they had the opportunity to challenge Soviet power. But could Eastern Europe be freed from Soviet domination without a nuclear war?
Dulles had talked about liberation, but Eisenhower had insisted that he do so, that when he did so, he couple it with by peaceful means. And so it is not at all obvious how a liberation in the sense of rollback could be achieved merely by peaceful means.
The Soviet Empire extended across Europe into Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and into East Germany, which called itself the German Democratic Republic. Stalin had chosen Walter Ulbricht as the ruler of East Germany. He headed a regime servile to Moscow. After Stalin's death, Ulbricht pressed on, rebuilding his part of Germany along Stalinist lines.
Und unsere Straße veränderte ihr Gesicht. Wo vor Monaten noch Ruinen standen, waren Konstrukteure, Maurer und Zimmerleute an der Arbeit.
Heavy industry was built up to meet the demands of the Soviet economy. Workers were ordered to increase their output. Everyday needs were neglected.
Die Normalbevölkerung lebte.
The average person lived very badly.
Die Versorgungslage war teilweise katastrophal.
If you're talking about the things everybody needs, like heating, coal, electricity, these things were all rationed.
Für Feuerung, Kohlen beispielsweise. Dann tägliche
Electricity for domestic use was simply not available.
War also nicht genügend Elektrizität
The
vorhanden.
morale of the population dropped to zero.
Die Moral der Bevölkerung war, ich würde sagen, unter Nullpunkt.
Like Stalin, Ulbricht tolerated no opposition. The secret police, the Stasi, had its informers everywhere. Many churches were closed. Censorship prevailed. But East Germany was unable to stop people deserting to the West. Travel to the British, American, and French sectors of Berlin was open to East Germans. Thousands simply packed their bags and left.
The flow of East German refugees to sanctuary in the western sector of Berlin reaches record proportions with news of the death of Stalin. Conditions are none too comfortable for these people, but they're happy to be beyond the reach of the Reds.
Undeterred, Ulbricht demanded renewed loyalty from East Germans. Alarmed, the new leaders in the Kremlin ordered Ulbricht to soften his rigid policies. He complied only half-heartedly. The hated production quotas remained in place.
If you were timed with a stopwatch to make a screw, and it took you 4 minutes, you were now expected to do it in 2.5. That was the shocking thing, this raise in work quotas and the pressure to produce. It was all too much for working people.
Popular anger exploded. Workers took to the streets of East Berlin.
When we passed construction sites, everybody, metal workers, locksmiths, masons, carpenters, all joined us. When we arrived at the city hospital, there were several thousand people with us. Banners appeared at the construction sites saying, "Down with the work quota increases."
News of the growing unrest soon spread to West Berlin.
I was having lunch in an open-air restaurant in West Berlin on the 16th of June when a friend of mine who was in military government and probably in intelligence drove past and said to me, "Charles, you ought to be in East Berlin." So I got into my car and I went over and ran into the building workers who by that time had left the building sites, were on strike and were marching through East Berlin. And where I caught up with them was near the Friedrichstraße Bahnhof station, the main station right in the middle of East Berlin. And by that time, striking in itself was a political act, was an act of rebellion. But marching through the streets was something more, was almost kicking off a revolution.
Strikes and mass demonstrations erupted in East Berlin and throughout East Germany. Demonstrators tore down the symbol of Soviet domination, the hammer and sickle. Government authority in East Berlin collapsed. A senior East German communist, Karl Schördewan, was horrified.
Ulbricht, Grete-Wohl, Herrnstadt and a few others were all inside the Soviet headquarters at Karlshorst. They just sat there and talked among themselves, but nobody made any decisions. Nobody called for a meeting of the Central Committee. I thought the party was leaderless.
The demonstrators vented their anger on all visible reminders of communist rule. The Soviet authorities were astonished that Ulbricht had allowed the crisis to get out of control.
When Ulbricht arrived at the Soviet headquarters at Karlshorst, he telephoned Karl Scherdevan and asked him what was going on. Scherdevan reported that there were a lot of drunks in the crowd and they were smashing the windows and were about to break in. Ulbricht put the phone down and said in German, "It's all over." He said it in a way which, in Russian, roughly translates as, "It's the end." I wondered, what did it all mean? Even if they smash the windows, they have no weapons. It will take us no more than 5 minutes to sort them out.
They were trying to elect a strike committee from the leaders of the workers when 4 Russian tanks